2011 meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Redevelopment Agency. Can we have a roll call for the council?
Council members: Manukian.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Friedman.
Here.
I think it's the Water and Power Commission.
And I'll call, no, it's the redevelopment
I'm
first.
sorry.
And I'll call to order redevelopment agency and for September 13th, the joint meeting and roll call for the redevelopment.
Agency members: Friedman.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chair Manukian.
Here.
Can we hear your report, please?
The agenda for the September 13th, 2011 joint public meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Redevelopment Agency was posted on Thursday, September 8th, 2011 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Before these bodies this afternoon is a public hearing. Director of Community Development regarding proposed ordinance and resolution to amend Title 30 of Glendale Municipal Code and Downtown Specific Plan relating generally to the transfer of design review authority from the Redevelopment Agency to City Council. Amendments to the agency design guidelines and miscellaneous revisions to design review process in both redevelopment areas and the Downtown Specific Plan area outside of a redevelopment area, PZON 2011-008. 1A is an ordinance for introduction, Title 30. At 1B is a resolution amending the Glendale Redevelopment Agency design guidelines.
Okay, can we have a staff report on item 1?
Yes, I'll go to Tim Foy, Assistant Director of Planning. Tim?
I'll open the public hearing.
Thank you. This is fairly simple. Most of the action here regards transfer of authority from the agency to the City Council for various land use entitlements. The Council has already acted on this once. The City Attorney's Office thought that our legal position would be strengthened if we actually codified it into the zoning code as well. So that's the majority of what is before you. And secondly, we are making some changes to the guidelines adopted by the agency. In places they're referred to as design guidelines, and they actually have no design guidelines in them. So we're just updating that information, and
Impact fee is item 2.
I relied on the advice of Mr. Loomis as to how he's been working with architects and what would be useful to have for submission materials and that sort of thing. And then the very last part is clarification of levels of design review authority for projects in the agency or in the downtown specific plan. There were places where the language was confusing and a little contradictory, especially in the agency design guidelines. So we're just putting more of an order to that, which I think will be especially important if the agency is eliminated.
Okay, are there any questions?
So exactly what was the process before someone is going to apply for design approval that you supply for through the redevelopment agency? What do they have to do now?
They still apply.
So it's on record, on public
Yes,
record, people understand.
They still apply to the design review agency. It's just the level of what can be exempted with a stamp over the counter, what gets approved with just an administrative staff review, and then what has to go to a public hearing. It's those delineations.
But that's all the same, isn't it?
Yes, it's the same.
And we're transferring it to the city council now, that authority.
That's right.
So do they have to apply to the redevelopment agency, or do they apply to the city council?
It's
Or
transferred to the city council.
what is the process they have to go through if someone's going to apply for a design review approval?
I should have mentioned that similar to the action you took a few months earlier, these are just contingent plans to transfer authority to the city council in the event that the agency is eliminated.
Okay.
So
what
the
would the
process for an
process
applicant will
be?
be just the same. They will apply. They will apply.
They will still apply with the redevelopment agency?
Yeah, they'll be working with redevelopment agency staff and with.
And if redevelopment agency is eliminated, then what would they do?
Then just general community development staff, probably in the planning division, they will continue to work with Mr. Loomis, the principal urban designer.
They still have to go to the same place to apply if something happens.
Yeah. If I can, I might add that from the applicant's standpoint, we'll work to make this as transparent and visible as possible, so people really won't feel a change if after the first of the year, when the Supreme Court makes its determination, if there actually is a termination of redevelopment agency, we'll put together a plan for how we transition. But at this moment, with the exception of the process as it relates to the City Council and agency board making determinations, the process will be pretty seamless for the applicants.
The major difference is the city council will hear the item as opposed to the redevelopment agency.
Okay. And the process will remain the same in terms of turning in the paperwork and applying to the
It
same
will.
place?
It will.
It will not be a different department or different individuals?
And we should clarify, as it relates to the current stay and projects in the redevelopment project area and design review, will the city process kick in at this point now?
Members of the agency and the city council, Mr. Starbird, yes, it does, because currently the agency is stayed from taking any actions on including design review. So therefore, this process is put in place.
So it's not a contingency thing?
No, so it's really not a contingency. It's really taking effect now while we are in the stay. Now, if the Supreme Court clarifies that those agencies that opted into the VARP program may continue to operate, then we can undo all of this and you can go back to the normal process. But for now, because of the stay, wraps all agencies in, and you can't take any actions, then essentially it kicks in now. Even though the agency hasn't been eliminated, it still kicks in.
That's correct.
So at this point, it's a new process that it has to come to City Council if there's a requirement for approval for design review. It comes to City Council.
The
So it's
steps are
clear
the
to the
same.
community that it's not
That's
being
correct.
delayed.
It's
for
not
any-
being delayed. The steps are the same. It's just that the hearing body is, instead of the redevelopment agency, will be the city council.
Okay, and in terms of the review authority, is anything being changed other than that in terms of over-the-counter approvals, as you were saying earlier? Is that being changed in any way? What is being changed?
The only clarification that we're putting in there is that the cutoff for what can be an over-the-counter stamp for exemption, the cutoff that the size level of a project that we have in all other commercial zones, we're applying that also to the redevelopment areas and to the DSP. Above that, it will still be, if it's,
What is
still be
that cutoff?
reviewed by staff, but there will be a more extensive review, and it's not just, that will be called an administrative review. We already do that, but we just wanted to clarify what that cutoff is for what could be an over-the-counter stamp.
What is that cutoff?
I believe it is, I believe it's 500 square feet.
So over 500 square feet, they have to go through an administrative review in the
Administrative
redevelopment
review,
zone?
which- Yes, if it's under 10,000 square feet, it can still be a staff level, though, and not
Okay.
be a public hearing.
Anything else that is being changed that the public should be aware of so that it's clear for them? The public who might not be reading this?
Right. The only other implication, and this is really kind of echoing action the council's already taken, is that in the last budget session, we instituted a design review fee for administrative review,
So there's an additional fee?
comparable to everything else. It's not.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. Is there any discussion of this item? I have no cards. Can I have a motion?
I'll introduce the ordinance at 1A.
Just one. Oh, yes, one. Can he do 1A and B together?
The ordinance has to be introduced separately, and then the resolution could be, has to be moved and seconded.
Okay.
Now we'll move 1B. It's a motion.
Okay, roll call?
Council members: Menuchyan,
Is it a council resolution? No.
Najarian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Friedman.
Yes. Next item, please.
2 is Director of Community Development regarding Development Impact Fee Early Payment Option. 2A is Council Motion directing staff to return with options to alter the terms of the program.
Okay. Jill Payne.
Ms. Mayor, members of the City Council, Mr. Chairman, members of the Redevelopment Agency. In July, you directed staff to implement a policy that would allow developers to pay the parks and library fee, this year's rate, to pay it this year if they entered into a development agreement and were ready to submit for plan check. And we have determined that the plan check is a foundation only, which gives you much of the building, and we're able to calculate the fee with that. We had identified approximately 5 projects that we thought could take advantage of this policy. Since we were before you in July, we've identified an additional 3. They're listed in your staff report. It has been brought to our attention, staff's attention, that there may be as few as 3 and as many as 5 of those projects that can do everything that was asked of them. That is, enter into the development agreement, pay the fee, enter and waive their ability for a refund if they don't do the project. They can do all of those. The schedule is too aggressive for them to be able to submit for a foundation-only permit. The purpose of our item before you today is to ask the City Council if you would like us to develop alternate submission requirements that might allow those 3 projects, those 3 to 5 projects, to take advantage of this program. They would still be responsible for paying the fee this year and waiving any type of opportunity for a refund if they don't do the project. But we would come back to you with some alternates on the need to submit for plan check. The question before you is, would you like us to develop those? Staff can do that very quickly if you'd like and come back within the next week or 2.
Questions? Yeah.
Didn't we discuss this before? Is it the first time that's becoming in front?
No, we did discuss it before, and
And I thought we approved going forward with this.
you did with the terms of the program that they would submit, the developers would submit for plan check by the end of the year. Some of the developers that are working on these projects have found that that schedule to submit for plan check is too aggressive for them where they are in the process. So we've been asked, and we come to you, would you like us to
Now we
alter?
want to make it easier for them to pay, is that it? To pay the fee, we want to make it easier for them to pay the fees up front?
Well, the fees double.
They can't get the plan check by the year end, is that it?
That's correct. They can't submit for plan check by year end. They could do all the other things that you asked of them. They're unable to submit for plan check by the end of the year, some of these.
If I might-
The question is, would you like us to alter those submission requirements from submit for plan check to something else?
Just to clarify, I mean, the purpose of doing this was to allow these projects that are most of the way through the process to be able to continue under this particular set of permit fees. That was the intention, and these specific projects that you mentioned, the 5 projects, were specifically called out as projects that were very far along in the process. And we set up this list of criteria that we thought they could meet so that those projects could move forward. But the reason that the plan check, as far as I understand it, is too onerous for them is that some of these projects have not fully gone through design review with us all the way. And so to ask them to do a building permit when they don't have a fully approved design review is just a burden that maybe none of them can meet. So I just wanted to clarify the reason that they've come back, why it seems like we're seeing this again. Let me go to the public, and then we can have further
Could I ask a
discussion.
question?
Yes.
How are these projects situated financially? Finances in line, problems? If we make it easier, is the financing there for them?
To the extent we know their finances are in line with what they've represented to us, the real test will be if they pay that fee by December 31st. And then it's a non-refundable fee, so whether they are able to finance their project or not wouldn't affect our collection of the fee.
With nobody lending, I just have the question.
Okay, I have 2 cards, Rodney Kahn, followed by Jason Tolson.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council, and City staff. My name is Rodney Kahn. My offices are located here in the city of Glendale. For the past several weeks, we've actually been meeting with your city staff, and we're trying to determine what the criteria was, and Mr. Lanzafame explained it very well, so I'm not going to repeat that. Typically, construction documents begin when your entitlements are approved. The reason being is because if there's design changes, you don't want to have expended time, money, and resources drawing up plans, structural, civil, architectural, that are going to change. It just doesn't make economic sense. We have a lot of coordination that needs to take place, as you can well imagine, between our architects, our civil engineers, our structural engineers, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, etc. All of them do plans, all of them do calculations. All of this has to be coordinated, and it's not simple, quick, or easy. I'll give you a couple examples. We've been working on Nick Lamb's project, 50-unit project on Colorado for quite some time. If we're fortunate enough to come before you in November, which we're scheduled to be, and we're successful in getting that approval, then the way it currently exists, we would have literally from Thanksgiving up to Christmas time to put together construction documents, and you can imagine how many people are, how difficult that is during that time period to get that work done. For a process that typically would take about 3 months, we're going to have to do within a matter of a few weeks. For the larger scale projects, it even gets more time consuming in terms of construction documents. So what you're going to end up with is one of two scenarios. You're going to end up with a situation where people are just piecemealing plans, construction documents, and everything else to try to meet this deadline in order to fulfill this criteria. And I don't think that benefits the city of Glendale, and it certainly doesn't benefit the development community. We understand there's a benefit to being able to pay this fee, and we also understand there's a benefit to the city to collect this fee and have these projects move forward. Mr. Weaver mentioned in terms of the financing for these projects, I'm actually working on 5 of these projects. The 5 projects that I'm working on have their financing in place. So these, if you were successful in doing this, giving us this opportunity, we would move forward with these projects. In terms of staff time, I think you'll actually be saving the staff time, because if they get complete and accurate documents, the checks, the plan checks, the rechecks, and everything else will go much smoother. I have a few seconds. I'll take, if I can, 30 more seconds, and I'll wrap up.
Do it quickly.
Thank you. In terms of what we would respectfully request, everything would be the same as to what you adopted. The only thing would be give us the appropriate amount of time to make these plans accurate and complete. The appropriate amount of time, in my opinion, for the smaller scale projects would be 6 months. For the larger scale projects would be up to 1 year. If you wanted to have a consistent policy and said it would just be up to 1 year, I think that that would be very fair and very reasonable, and we would all benefit from that. Please consider these are a handful of important projects to our city. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Question from the speaker. Were you here last time we discussed this issue?
No, I was not.
I was going to raise the issue, why didn't you realize that you could not achieve the plan check by this when this issue was discussed last time, and why wasn't it brought up? And
No.
if you weren't here, then I guess you're off the hook.
Thank you. Then I gave you the right answer,
Okay.
but I was not here.
Okay. Maybe your developer was here, or some of the other developers were here, who were in favor of our approval last time. And they didn't raise the issue that, well, we can't get it done by December, the plan checks.
Wasn't raised.
Okay. It wasn't raised, that's the whole point. So here we are doing it over again with another deadline, so thank you. I'll ask the next speaker if he's a representative or something. Same
Thank you.
question.
Thank you. Jason Tolson?
Oh, the lucky one.
Yes. You read.
Good afternoon, council members and staff. My name is Jason Tolson of Serrano Development Group. Our address is 500 North Brand, 2120 in Glendale, California. I'm here today representing Mapleton RDS Investments and Lemley Theaters on the Lemley Lofts project at Wilson and Maryland. Appreciate the opportunity to comment on the ongoing discussion of establishing an appropriate benchmark for vesting for the parks and library fees as it relates to our project. We're currently working with our design team and city staff to prepare our Stage 1 and Stage 2 design submittal on or before September 22nd, with the goal of having our entitlements completed by the end of the year. This includes all environmental review, development agreements, Stage 1, Stage 2 design review approvals. Our design team and city staff assigned to the project are working at a feverish pace to accomplish this delivery schedule. I respectfully request that the council consider modifying the current requirement that in addition to all entitlements, a particular project would need to submit fully developed foundation plans for a foundation-only permit by the end of the year. It is our opinion that this additional requirement will lead to hastily prepared plans, divert limited resources away from a thorough and thoughtful design review package, and unnecessarily tax the city staff with multiple project submittals all at once and during the holidays. The Lemley Lofts project would like to concur with today's recommendation from staff that a complete and approved entitlement package, as well as 2011 Parks and Rec fees paid in full by the end of the year, should provide the city and agency with adequate security for the vesting.
Mr. Menuchyan?
Just, isn't Lemley project on hold until December anyways?
Question I wanted to
And
ask.
you don't know if it's going to go through?
Redevelopment.
The question of the modification of the project for underground parking, we can't take action on that until we get clarification from the
Right.
court or a court decision. That's right.
And there's no approval for any other project unless that happens.
Well, that is a project that's being impacted by the court stay.
Right. So you're willing to pay the fee, just for the record, you said additional requirement. This is not an additional requirement. We're giving you an exception, actually,
Correct.
from the requirement. So it's not anything additional
Fair enough.
to the process. But you're willing to pay the fees before December without knowing if the project's going to go
Yes,
through
we'd
or
like,
not?
we'd like to have that option.
Well, it's not an option. You have to pay it by December.
Yes, we would be willing to pay the fees by the end of the year.
And your project might not go through.
That's correct.
Okay. Just so we're clear and it's on the record. Thank you.
Thank you. That was my last card. Is there any discussion from the...
I have some discussion, and these fees, who can I address these to? Phil, maybe? Okay, these fees that we're requiring them to pay are, what are they called?
Parks and Library impact fees.
And they go towards,
They go, the majority of them to build parks infrastructure, a small percentage to libraries.
Okay.
They're capital, they're earmarked for capital projects.
two areas that I think we all agree on are impacted quite heavily by the current budget situation of the city, correct?
I would agree.
And in fact, that was the impetus for us adopting these fees I think it was about 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, to obtain the additional fees to assist the parks and the libraries based on the nexus that the new development would place on the parks and the libraries. So this isn't necessarily a tax. This is a fee that's going directly to address the impacts that any new development, whether it's commercial, is commercial included in this?
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm. And residential as well, would make on our resources. And our resources in parks and libraries, I'm going to use a word, are crumbling at this moment. And then, not too long ago, we decided, against my vote, to extend the opportunity for those developments that are in the pipeline to take advantage of the lower fees that were in effect until 2010, correct? Wasn't that the timeline that was originally?
Yes, I believe you're one step back. That is correct. We pushed everything.
Right. Let's not forget that step, because we were
Entitlements.
we were told that these projects are in the pipeline, they're ready to go, and let's let them take advantage of the lower fees, and let's not burden them with the additional fees, because they're going to be done very soon. And I was strongly against that. I forget what the vote was on council. It may have been 4-1. I don't recall exactly. But now, essentially, are we giving them another extension? Is that what Mr. Khan was talking about? Give us another year for the lower fees?
I believe that's. Let me address it this way.
Another
you are
year?
correct.
No, this year. End of
Another
2011.
12 months for big projects.
I think Mr. Khan
6
said give me
months
another
for
year
small.
on one of his projects.
You are correct. I'm sorry.
Just to be clear, the program you already adopted allows somebody who would have otherwise, had they filed after January 1 or after December 31, their fee would have gone to $7,000 per unit, comparable amount for commercial. You allowed them, if they pay the fee early, if they get their plan check application in for foundations by December 31. And the developers will tell you to do their plans for foundation. They've got to do calcs on almost the entire building. So it is a lot of work. But you allowed them some leeway that if they did that with a non-refundable payment, then you'd allow them to get under the wire so they could avoid the increase in the fees. You're correct. Way back when we first did this, the impact fees, there was a concern by the projects in the pipeline that because they had already closed escrow in many cases, had plunked down their money for their land, to then impose considerable fees on them would be very negative on the project. So part of the philosophy of the pipeline fees back then was you'd protect those projects that had already negotiated for their land, set their price, and then with the first stage of the fees, people would know, developers would know, this is what you're going to be burdened with, and then 2 years later you'd have an increase in the fees as we're facing now December 31. And is it 2 years later another jump up in the fees, or is it 3 years later? I forget.
Continue, and I'll find out.
Anyway, then you have another jump up in fees a year or 2 or 3 later that will take it, I think, to $10,000 per unit. Now, nobody anticipated the economic downturn in the meantime. So as a result, and I think you had several purposes behind approving this current program. I think one is you locked in the fees, which you collected earlier than you otherwise might. I think you provided an incentive for some of these projects to go forward. What we heard was if we're facing the larger fee, in some cases as much as an additional $1 million, it's questionable whether a project will go forward. And two, I think you help encourage development to move forward more quickly. Now what we're hearing is it's awfully burdensome to get our foundation plans into plan check by December 31. So what's been requested of you is give us more time to get under that threshold. Frankly, my personal view is I think a year is too much. I think a year is too much. I think if it were extended a year, then frankly, I don't think you're getting what you were anticipating you'd be getting when you set this program up, and that is an expedited project. We actually want the project to move forward as quickly as possible because if they come online sooner, we begin collecting tax increment and property taxes much sooner. And that was also part of your rationale for setting up the program.
Okay, I'm not finished now. Let me get through to this. The whole point, and when was our discussion of this previously with the discounted fees paid in advance?
In July?
July 19th.
The whole point was there is always uncertainty in a construction project, always uncertainty. And the point was to give a discount on those fees, what otherwise would be the full fees, to anyone developing, to give us the money in advance, and then let them take their chances with their design review, whether they can design it accordingly or whether they can get their plans executed and financing in and constructed accordingly. So, I mean, what I'm seeing here is we're continually giving breaks to these developers, the first time, the second time, the third time. What we're doing is we're absorbing more of these costs. These are costs that the city is bearing. When we build a swimming pool, when we build parks, when we want to put artificial turf out on these fields because there's more people using them, these are costs now that we're going to come to other departments and other sources and ask them to cut and ask them to trim, or we're not going to put those improvements in that a city like ours needs. And I'm really opposed to giving another break. And this is a take your chances. You pay your money now, you take your chances. Or if you want to be absolutely certain that you're going to have your building going, then you pay the full fees when they get implemented. So we are continually coming back and giving break after break after break. The loser here, and now you can argue, property tax increase and all this other stuff, but the immediate loser are our parks and our libraries. And other departments within the city, because when we come back and say we want another 2 or 3% cut from every department, it's police, it's fire, it's everyone else that takes money out of the general fund, and our capital improvement fund is devastated. It's scorched earth at this point. There's nothing left. So I'm very much against what we're doing here. We are continually giving breaks and breaks and breaks.
Mr. Najarian, I just wanted to make sure that I understood what you said. You are correct that we did push it a whole year, and there was a lot of conversation about it. And that's why this time we structured it so you have to put up or shut up. You have to pay your fee. That hasn't changed. Every developer that would take advantage of this program would still have to pay the fee by December 31st of this year. The question is, do we allow them to submit for plan check after that. And Mr. Starbird said a year is too long, which, or is, in his opinion, which was requested. So, again, the question is, do you want us to come back?
Where it's requested an additional year? I'm under the impression that it ends December 31st, 2011.
I believe what Mr. Khan was asking was,
An additional year?
Let us pay our fee right now, before December 31st. We'll enter into the development agreement. We'll do everything you ask, but then give us 1 year to submit for plan check.
In other words, instead of submitting for plan check by December 31 of this year, they'd have until December 31 of 2012 to submit for plan check, but they would have locked in their fees and paid us before the end of this calendar year.
We're not extending the paying of the fees.
No, not extending the payment of the fee, only the time that you would give them to meet the obligation to submit their plans for plan check.
For larger projects.
Right.
Laura?
Yeah, small and large, 6 months a year.
Okay, I'd like to give my rationale and opinions. I personally would rather have the money up front with no, it's non-refundable, for these 8 projects, all of whom, except for the new Nordstroms, the other 7 are all mixed-use apartment type of projects, which is a goal for our downtown. I'd rather have that money up front than to risk losing these projects. They are going to have to do their EIRs. They're going to have to go through DRB. They're going to have to go through lots of hoops. Basically, what they're asking for is to do that first and then do their plan check, which is the structural engineering, the foundation plans, etc. So I don't have a problem with doing that, and I hope that we do, in fact, have these projects come to fruition. So it's quite a bit of money that we will be collecting by December of this year that we can devote to infrastructure projects, especially in the parks, since the bulk of the money goes to parks. So I support it, and in terms of whether it's a year, 6 months, 9 months, I mean, technically kind of leave that up to the staff or whatever decision we make. But the idea of collecting these fees up front, I'm all for it. When we headed down this road, I was a big proponent of it and of the fees. Thought it was a great idea. I still think it's a great idea. But we were also talking about doing this at the very top of the market. The market has collapsed. Since those days, there hasn't been one downtown project. There's one currently under construction, but I mean, that's basically it. None of these are all sort of rehash projects in the sense that they originally came to the Redevelopment Agency and the City Council proposing some really tremendous projects, 5-star hotels, condominium towers, etc. That went by the wayside. What's come back, I think, is very doable. Basically commercial with 5 stories or 4 stories above for housing. So this is what I envision for the downtown, and I support the staff recommendation.
Mr. Mnuchin?
In the report under fiscal impact, it says none. How can that be if we're foregoing half the fees that these people are going to pay?
The item that we're asking you is, do you want us to come back and give you some alternative submission requirements? At that time, we would identify.
Yeah, but if we approve that, then there is a fiscal impact.
There will be a
where
fiscal impact.
The taxpayers are foregoing a certain amount of funds that might or might not be collected in 2012.
Correct.
That will not be collected if this is implemented.
That's correct. And that's how we structured the original staff report, so you could see both those numbers.
So what is the approximate fiscal impact of these 5 projects not paying the fees for 2012 but paying it for 2011?
While he's looking at that, can I just make a comment on that point? Because I think the other side of that, that's the downside of this. I mean, from a public standpoint, that you see this as giving up fees, which is true. But the other argument that can be made, you weighed this when you adopted this back in July, is what if there's some of these projects that won't go forward, or they may be delayed for who knows what period of time, potentially because they can't make the project work economically. The amount of property taxes that gets lost, the development inertia that gets started in downtown, that's kind of the other side of this coin and what you're trying to balance
And the
between
fees.
giving them a break and, on the other hand, wanting to encourage these developments to move forward. There may be one or more of these projects that won't happen or won't happen as quickly if they have the burden of the fees or if they have to file by December 1. So to the extent you can encourage the development and bring it online possibly sooner, property taxes flow sooner, the impact on downtown happens quicker. That's kind of the other side of that coin. And I'm not sure, you can't put a number on that, but that's just what you have to weigh from a policy standpoint.
And just to respond to that comment, I think it would be more favorable to have less projects and greater fees. I mean, you can look at it from that perspective, where you're earning the same amount of fees with half the projects. So either way, it's pretty much a wash in terms of the number of projects that are being pushed through this, and the taxpayers are being asked to take a cut in their fees at this point.
Although if you look at this holistically, and many of these are housing projects, having people downtown, creating a 24/7 environment in the downtown area where people are living and shopping and working and playing, that has a tremendous economic benefit. That's been part of the overall strategy of wanting to generate housing in the downtown area. Part of the discussion behind the Broadway lofts and other housing projects has been, how do we support the downtown economically? And for a long time, your strategy has been, we need to create a 24/7 environment where there's people and vitality and life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in the downtown. So getting these projects online, I think far more than the initial park fee and even the building fees and maybe even the property taxes generated, is creating this environment downtown where you have vitality and life and people shopping and living and playing on a 24/7 basis. And the extent you can assure that, then again, I think that's what you need to balance. I'm not saying that moving forward with a change is right or wrong. It's just that the other side of this coin is not just the dollars and cents from the fees that are paid, it's what we can accomplish through development in the downtown area.
Mr. Weaver?
Well, you can sit down, Phil.
I'll call you back up.
I'm kind of puzzled. I looked at the beginning, and I asked about the financial picture, and it's still supposed to be good. Financing is available for all the projects. Ask about redevelopment. We know redevelopment's on hold, and the Lemley's involved in that because of the underground parking. But apparently all the projects are in the same boat. I assume they all did critical paths that showed how they can get the whole way through to construction. And I'm being asked to believe that all the projects are in the same exact boat. All of them need an extension. Not one is ahead of the other. That doesn't seem logical to me, why they'd all be in the same boat. I happen to believe, I take partial fees because we've argued we want projects on the ground and starting to generate revenue and people downtown. Buy that, but to buy that they need 6 months or 12 months, depending on how many square footage they are, and they all need the same thing, it doesn't really fly with me. I voted for the reduced fees, and I'll continue to support that. I'd like to hear back from staff why they all need 6 months or need a year to do. Come on, the engineers that laid it out ought to know what their critical paths are and where they're at this time and where they're going. I can't get my hands on that right now. That's why I'd want a report back with options and explaining why they're all in the same boat. Because a year ago they were all going to be moving, and now another year, and it's going to be another year. Where's the guarantee to the city it's going to happen? Again, I reiterate, I'd rather have some of the fees than none of the fees. Just because it's a bigger project doesn't mean it's going to shorten any time to get to us. So, present it, but I'd like to give staff the opportunity to come back with some information.
Mr. Najarian?
While we were sitting here talking about this, the issue came up that there are these 5 identified projects, 5 projects. And my ethics alarm went off in my head, because we have just passed a campaign finance reform law. And I'm concerned that some of these principals or subs or that whole long list of associated employees and agents to these projects may have given me money. If I vote one way or the other to extend this time, it certainly gives a benefit to them. It might not be conferring the entitlement, but it is clearly a financial benefit to these developers. I want to know who these people are. I want the list, just like we said we were going to do. And why isn't that done? Let me ask you this. I mean, is this a... I'm very concerned that...
Says there's no listing.
If I may, Councilmember Jaren, the campaign finance ordinance was very specific to applications for entitlement, so to the specific entitlement. So what this policy is a policy of giving direction to staff to go ahead and process development agreements for these projects. Those development agreements will be an entitlement. So when they come back to you, they will trigger the campaign finance ordinance at that time. So at that time, those disclosures will be done. We can certainly provide them earlier. But as far as the actual requirement that a council member who's received a contribution from either the applicant that's seeking entitlement or their selected contractors or subcontractors, that obligation isn't triggered until the actual development agreement is before you.
So we raised that question in the drafting of the staff report and asked the city attorney what his opinion would be on it.
Well, I'm telling you, my own alarm goes off, because when I see that there's 5 projects listed, these are the ones that are in a position to take advantage of this advantage that no one else in the city is getting at this point, and no one else is in a position to receive. And the explanation as well, this isn't the official entitlement, that comes later. I don't want to... I would argue this is an end around our ordinance on campaign finance reform. We got 5 specific people here, projects, and I think we better tread softly. And I would like, personally, a written opinion by the city attorney's office, so we all collectively don't violate the law that we passed a month ago.
Mr. Starbird, did you
I can provide the opinion.
put your light on for a reason?
Oh,
Okay. Mr. Quintero?
yeah, I think that's a good idea to have the paperwork
I'd be happy to provide that.
that Mr. Najarian is talking about. Does anybody have an idea of how much money we're talking about at $3,500
That's my question.
per units? How much are we going to get in upfront?
Yes, I was going to call Mr. Lanzafame back up just for the same
non-refundable
issue.
fees.
Mr. Chairman,
Ballpark.
members of the agency, Ms. Mayor, members of the City Council, it's approximately $1.2 million. We would receive $1.2 million by the end of the year. If all of those 5 paid their fee, we would be foregoing $1.2 million in additional fees if they paid it once it...
Do you know how much we'll get from the Nordstrom's build-out?
just under $95,000.
So it's just less for commercial,
Correct.
but the residential's, and the total is $1.2 million.
Correct.
Thank you.
Let me make a few comments. First, I think we should be clear about our intent in this and what the process was. Our intent back in July when we debated this was to allow for projects that we felt, and not specific projects, the staff gave us a list of projects that could take advantage of this, but it certainly is not limited to that. Anybody else who comes in who's got a project that's far along in the process can also take advantage of this. It's a policy change, not something that calls out certain projects for special treatment. But the idea was, as has been said, to allow those projects that are at a certain point in the process, whose developers have committed significant amounts of money and time to, and then been hurt by the economic slowdown, to continue to pay the fees now, risk forfeiting those fees if they don't move forward, and to move forward in the process. So we agreed to that and left it to staff. Staff had come up with a list of criteria. And what's now happened is that they've come back to us. Staff has said a majority, or possibly all of the projects cannot meet the criteria we've set up. The idea of requiring a certain type of building permit in some ways was an arbitrary criteria set by the staff to signify that a project was a certain distance, a certain how far along they were in the process. It was arbitrary. It could have been a different type of permit that they required as proof. So to get hung up on why the engineers can't do it kind of misses the point. We told the developers, we will make this option available to you of paying fees early, risk losing those fees and moving forward. We're going to make that option available to you. And then what we did was say, but we're going to set the criteria so high that none of you can qualify. And to me, that really circumvents the intent of what we were trying to do back in July. So if we really were serious about letting people pay these fees and trying to get these projects moving, we should go ahead and give staff direction to come back with something that still shows that the projects are far along in the process, but giving them a reasonable chance to achieve that. Because if none of these projects can make that deadline by December, then we were either lying to them in July when we told them we would set this up, or we made a mistake, which is what I think happened. I think staff assumed that they could hit this benchmark, but in reality, because it was only in July and because we're hitting the holidays, they just weren't able to do it. And I agree with Mr. Quintero that in this economic climate, I would rather know that I'm having a certain amount of fees than risk not having any of them at all. And I agree with Mr. Starbird that there is a residual economic benefit to these particular projects moving forward. You know, there are communities out there that are desperate for any kind of development and any kind of growth, and all of the associated jobs that brings along with it, economic activity, all of those sorts of things. And we're in a position here of either allowing that to happen or shutting the door on a lot of that. And to me, that's a no-brainer. I mean, in this climate, anything that we can do to encourage job creation, to encourage economic development, we should be doing. You know, there's also a lot of lip service that's paid these days to helping businesses in this economic climate. And here we have a chance to do something that not only helps businesses and moves them forward in their projects, but also helps the city in terms of generating possibly over $1 million in fees for our parks and libraries. So I find it easy to support this. I would ask staff, and to me it's not a question of the time that the developers take necessarily, it's what's the criteria we want to signify that they're serious. In my mind, paying those fees really shows a lot. I mean, that's a lot to ask a developer who may not even be able to finish getting their entitlements to put up a significant amount of money right now, which is, again, non-refundable. They forfeit it if they can't move forward. If they're willing to do that, they have a really good chance of getting their projects done. And, you know, that's what I'm concerned about. Are they just spinning our wheels here for an extension, or are they serious? So I'm fine with asking staff to come back with a more reasonable set of criteria that would allow the original intent back in July of having these projects continue to move forward under the previous fees. You know, it wasn't their fault that they were hit in this economic climate, and a lot of them had to put their projects on hold or completely reconfigure them. I think we need the development in the city, we need the jobs, we need certainly the boost to our economy, and to me that's the paramount thing here in this discussion. Mr. Quintero?
Well, and to be clear, they should continue with their EIR, their environmental impact reports, and their DRB process, because to me this is about the other side of development, which is basically engineering, structural, foundation, etc. That's what takes the time. That's what doesn't make any sense, to submit plans for foundations and structural engineering and you haven't been through DRB yet. Have no idea what the design review board may require. So I think they should continue to pursue the EIR and DRB, and then the plan checks is really last.
Well, where's the DRB?
Hang on, Mr. Minikian.
There's a couple of issues that kind of concern me. First, as this thing was brought forward on July 19th, I think it came from the developers to the staff and from the staff to the city council. So where everybody went wrong in terms of timing of paying these fees and turning in these plan checks by December, I don't know who went wrong. If staff went wrong, didn't staff talk to the developers when they requested it, and didn't the developers tell the staff that you know, this is an arbitrary deadline you're putting on us?
This is a very fair question. Hassan Haghani, Director of Community Development. At the time that we started bringing this to the council, one developer had approached us, and the developer was sure that they could submit for plan check, the entire plan check submittal by December. So we really didn't think that part of it. And the second part, I take responsibility that when we said submit for plan check, we didn't check in with the building official to see what that means in terms of submitting. And until recently, that the building official told me that we cannot take a submittal for plan check until it's at a level that's acceptable to us by a certain level of standards. That's very different than other submittals that you can take a submittal and then staff has taken the time to evaluate it and then write back to the applicant and say, we need these additional informations. The building official told us that in the building and safety practice, they will refuse to take a submittal in until it's at a certain level of development that is acceptable from an engineering standpoint. That was a piece of information that would have been crucial that the rest of the staff was not aware of, and we had not checked with the building official. I'm the person who was responsible for that. Had we known that, we would have asked a different criterion for the end process, and that would have been consistent with what the mayor mentioned.
Okay, thank you. So, when this was brought forward, different departments did not consult with each other. Second, the fiscal impact, I think it's misleading. It shouldn't be none. I strongly believe that whenever there's fiscal impact to the taxpayers, it should be stated so in the fiscal impact in the report that is presented to the City Council. And third, when it says here, there's no listing, again, you said in terms of the subcontractors and the people who are going to be doing the development, you said that you would check into it, but here it says there's no listing of principals, contractors under fiscal impact, again, no listing of principals, contractors, or subcontractors are required for disclosure for city's new campaign finance ordinance. Now, is there or isn't there? Why do you need to look into it if there is no listing?
No, I'm sorry, Councilmember Mnuchin. What I was referring to is that if the council would like staff to prepare the disclosures, at this point we could. I'm saying it's not required. We wouldn't be required to do it until the time we're bringing those development agreements back before you.
If I remember the ordinance that the campaign finance ordinance that we approved, the listing would be provided if it was available by the contractors, not necessarily you.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Not for policy change.
No, for campaign finance reform, if you didn't have a listing of the contractors, you would ask the developers if they had it, because if they were far enough, because they hire subcontractors at different times, and this is a discussion we had during the ordinance. If they would hire a certain number of contractors, if they had not hired them, then you wouldn't have a listing.
That's correct.
And this statement on their fiscal impact, that's the impression that I get, that they don't have a listing of their subcontractors at this time. Is that correct?
I'm not sure with respect to that statement. I think it was.
Was that asked from the developers?
Again, not at this point, because this is just a policy change as far as what staff is going to be processing for development agreements.
This does not trigger the need for that review because this is not an entitlement for a specific developer. Under our ordinance, we're making a policy change that affects any developer, not specific developers.
In fact, the item before you is, do you want us to come back to you with something more? We consulted with the city attorney's office and found that it didn't trigger any. That's why we made this statement here, so that you would be aware this is something that doesn't trigger that and you wouldn't be looking for.
I understand. However, the argument Mr. Najarian makes is valid, because in the staff report you have listed 5 specific projects. When you list the 5 specific projects that you're kind of, although you're not targeting, but you're targeting, you have to have a listing from the contractors or the developers, as a listing of the subcontractors, if there are any. And that's the ordinance. And there isn't here. However, there is a statement that says it's not required, and I understand the legal argument for it. But I think ethically it should have been included, and the developers should have been asked whether they have hired any contractors or not, and whether it should be listed or not. Because their projects, like I said earlier, are specifically listed in the report.
If I may, I understand the concern, but the projects are listed as examples. It doesn't have to only be those projects. anyone else could come forward at this time and say, I've got a project I've been working on, I have a plan, I have I have this, and I want to enter into a development agreement. I'm concerned that if we start to arbitrarily say that we want to use that campaign requirement for policy decisions, I'm just really kind of worried about where that goes. That if we just, from case to case, as we're making policy, say, well, with this one, let's make it to where we all have to check this list, but with this one, we don't. To me, if we were going to do that, we should have done that back when we initiated the ordinance, or bring the ordinance back and talk about rewriting the ordinance so that certain types of policy decisions fall under it. But to me, it seems sort of arbitrary at this point to say that we're going to subject this to an ordinance that clearly it was never intended to be subjected to. I mean, with that, I wouldn't mind if that list was provided to us. I don't have any problem with people seeing if I received any. I'm pretty sure I didn't receive any contributions from any of the developers, subcontractors. I have no idea if they have them or not at this point, but I don't have a problem with that list. I'm concerned about applying that particular ordinance to something that is not listed in the ordinance as that it's required to be applied to. Mr. Starbird?
Well, one of the benefits, again, of this two-step process, because as noted in the report, we also had the same feeling whether or not this would trigger that, because we have identified projects. The answer was legally no. City Attorney doesn't believe so. An advantage of this two-step process is, even though not legally required, if you want the information, we'll gather it before we bring it back. And we'll bring it back for the projects that we can foresee might possibly take advantage of the programs. But as you say, there may be some out there that we haven't identified and haven't come forward. We, of course, can't identify those. But we can bring you back what we know of if that's the will of the council.
I would like to have that come back, as was stated already. There's one more issue that hasn't been touched on thus far, and that is the fees themselves. If the fees that will be increased next year are so onerous, and they were set at the height of the market, should we be revisiting these fees to see whether they're really viable fees, or there's something that should be looked into? And should that, and I'm asking my colleagues, should that be brought back to kind of take a look and see whether these fees are reasonable?
And I think that those fees were set after a very long discussion as to what the cost to the city would be, the nexus between the city developing new parkland, just the capital improvements to construct new parkland and libraries. These weren't fees that we decided to figure how much do we think the developer is making. We want a piece of that. We said, how much is the impact going to be to the city? And I want to just reiterate, these fees are well below what the true impact was. The initial fees were well below what the true impact was to this city. So we're giving break after break after break. I would not be interested in revisiting the amount of these fees. I would not be. But that's how they were set. They were set in relation to what the cost to the city was by the additional usage that the
costs were probably subjective, but still, I kind of vaguely remember that. But if again, the question comes to mind for me is that is most important. Are these fees? Are they going to hinder future development, since we want, and I'm not in favor of the policy that Mr. Starbird mentioned in terms of building more housing in the downtown. I think we have enough vacant apartments and condos in the downtown, and we don't need to build more or give incentives for it. However, if these fees are so onerous, should we and it's to the other council members, should we be revisiting the fees?
Ms. Van Meyden, did you have something to add?
Yes, thank you, Madam Member, members of the City Council. The nexus study that we adopted for this, pursuant to AB 1600, determined that the fees were over $14,000 per unit, and so the Council made a decision to phase the fees in over a period of time, considered some projects initially that were well down the pipeline, and offered initially a pipeline fee amount for them. Those projects I don't think did get entitled. However, what the AB 1600 does require is an annual review of those fees. So given that the fee structure initially, based on the Nexus study, was over $14,000 a unit, the determination of whether or not it would be lowered based on an engineering study below what we already have, which is essentially 25% of that total fee, is unlikely.
So the conclusion is that these fees are not that onerous?
Not based on the Nexus study, and that is a determination of what the impact would be of new development on existing infrastructure.
Do we know what the fees are in Pasadena for similar fees?
I don't know currently.
Burbank or Pasadena?
I could tell that they're substantially higher in Pasadena. I don't know about other cities, and that's information that could probably be culled together.
Can I note the other factor?
I have a question. Is the Nexus study, was that citywide or was that around the downtown? It was citywide, right?
Citywide study required.
Because I also draw a distinction between building either apartments or condominiums in multifamily neighborhoods and what we do in the downtown. I just don't believe that young families are going to be renting units in the downtown. So I think there's going to be less of an impact than there would be in some of the multifamily neighborhoods where you've got kids going to school that need places to play and need green space, etc. But anyway.
Okay. I don't think you have your direction that you need. So if you would like to maybe ask for consensus on individual issues, maybe that's the way we can move forward, or just...
Madam Mayor, I think that would be helpful. The first one is, do you want to make some adjustment in the current program? If you don't, then the current program stays as it is. If you're willing to, we'd like to have some sense of what time frame you'd want to look at.
Why don't we take a vote, a straw poll, if that's okay? If we can just do a yay or nay of who is interested in staff coming back with changes to this program to allow more of these projects to take advantage of it. Start with Mr. Quintero.
I would be for it.
Would not be for it.
I started off in favor of it, but I'm hesitant at this point. If I had to vote right now, I'd vote no.
Okay, well, this is just for them to come
Right,
back.
I know.
Okay, that's fine. Mr. Weaver.
I don't mind looking, but I don't know if I'm going to approve anything
Right,
yet.
exactly.
So I need input, yeah.
Okay, I would be in favor of that, so I think you have your answer. Is that all the direction?
And I'll suggest when we bring this back to you, we'll bring back several options on the time frame and the implications of that.
And I would ask that this
in the
time...
meantime, can I ask you...
Wait, I would just ask, though, that this time you work with the developers or the development community and come up with criteria that both satisfies the council in terms of projects that are really seriously down the line and what's possible to be accomplished, so that we don't run into this again.
And work with the other branches of the same...
Yeah, and work with the other branches, with building and safety, so that we know what a plan check really means.
Okay, and if I may, Madam Mayor, in 15 minutes in MSP 105, we have staff explaining the current criteria requirements to anyone who wants to find out, and we will add to that a piece of information about the direction Council gave today with more information in maybe 2 weeks or so.
Now, do you want the information that would otherwise be required if these projects were subject to the campaign disclosure to come back when we bring the matter back to you, for at least the developments that we think would be eligible to participate?
I have no problem seeing that and having the public see it. I do want it to be clear to the public what that information means.
And in that case, we'll provide and it's a disclosure, but it won't require recusal of any council member who may have gotten a contribution, because, again, you won't be approving any entitlements when we bring this back in a week or two.
Okay.
And I would like to see the fiscal impact listed in the report as well.
Okay, thank you. That is our last item.
Wait, I'm not done yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see a hand.
I don't mind you doing that. The city attorney has ruled that we don't need to, but if my colleagues want to take the extra step, that's fine. But what I want, and I don't care if you want to just give it to me personally or whatever, I want to see the critical path that led to us giving the first extension, and it was best on best guess of everything that was going on in the steps, and the proposed critical path they think it's going to take. And critical path, you don't know, it takes you from step 1 through and gives you the timelines and weeks and months to get from the beginning to the end. And any developer should have that. Just don't, you're not pulling it out of the air. So I'd like to see what it was, and now what are they proposing? Because tell me they're all going to be on the same date and time? No way, man. Some are ahead of the others, and I'd like to see what they are. That'll help me in the decision-making on whether it's 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or what. So if none of my colleagues want that, then I would like that personally.
I think any report relating to this should come to all the council members.
That's fine.
I would love that.
Okay?
You'd love it?
Love it.
Oh, boy.
View it.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, with that, we have no other items. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Council is adjourned.
A motion for redevelopment, please.
So moved.
Second.
We are adjourned for redevelopment as well.
Okay, I believe we're calling the commissioners up here at this point. Do you have a plan about how we're squeezing people in and where and how? And
We will, if we could take a brief recess while we set up for this
okay,
meeting.
we'll take 5 minutes.